Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 255. Today we're going to talk about Cuba, the Splendid Little War. Now this is about the Cuban War for Independence in the late 1890s. So it's a two-player card-driven game. If you think Twilight Struggle, something like that. It plays pretty quickly. It's 7 turns. It's got a very small rule book, so to speak. It's about 8 pages with a nice play example at the end, which is very helpful. So let me just jump into how it works, and I'll come back and tell you what I think of it. Now here's how the game is going to look at setup. And setup is basically just dictated by this one card here. All the setup, placement of units and all the different tracks and things, that's all outlined here on this one card. So it's very simple to set up. Now, as I said, the game is going to last 7 turns. You can see the turn track up there. And then actually a nice little interesting touch here is you have 1 through 7 turns here, and it kind of gives you a little bit of historical perspective. So what I've been doing is actually just reading this little paragraph here, and it kind of gives you a little bit of suggestions through the history of what the people actually did, and so you can say, okay, well, guess what's coming, or good for them, I'm not going to do that at all. So this is actually a cool little thing there. Let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look at some of the spots on the board here. Now here you can see a lot of activity to start the game is going to be to the south area here in Camagüey and Oriente here outside of Santiago City. Now there's Cuban units here, and these are marked in blue, and you can see here these are Cuban generals like so. And the different actions that you're going to do, which are outlined nicely on this player aid, are sometimes going to require a general to be present, and others won't necessarily require those. The Spanish troops here are represented by these brown counters here. You can see you've got a full strength unit there with a combat value of 1, and then a combat value of 2, and then on 1 on the other side. So you're going to be doing a lot of different things with these units here. You can see we've got one city here, Santiago City. Outside here in Oriente, this area is worth 2 resources. Camagüey is worth 1. If we move over here to Las Villas, those are worth 2. So at the end of each turn, the Spanish player and the Cuban player also might get these amount of resources to add to their supply. The resources are tracked here. You can see both players start with 7 resources. This is going to tell you how many cards you get to draw at the end of each turn as well. And you're going to be spending these resources to do a variety of things. Some of the different actions are going to cost resources. Some of the cards that you're going to get are actually going to cost resources. Now, there's a few different ways that the game can end and how the different players can win. The main thing you're going to be looking at here is the Spanish public support. And this is going to go up and down during the game, either through card play or damaging units, killing off units, having Spanish units damaged or killed, having cities lost, basically sieged. That's going to reduce support. If the Spanish retake a city, for example, the support might go back up. Now, if ever the support hits 0, that's going to be an instant defeat for the Spaniards. You see here in these different rows here, admin phase, defeat if 2 cities captured. So if public support is still pretty high, up here 6 or greater, but they have 2 cities captured, then Spain is actually going to lose the game. If it gets down here in this row here, then if they have only 1 city captured, remember there's 2 cities on the board here. You can see there's Havana City up there, and then again down south here you have Santiago City. So as the support drops, then the win condition becomes easier for the Cubans. So turns are going to be very simple. You're either going to be taking one of the actions here on the chart, which I'll go over, or possibly playing 1 or more cards on your turn, and then actions is going to go back and forth, and then you're going to have sort of an administration phase, kind of do a little bit of small bookkeeping, and then go into the next turn. So let's take a look at these cards, and these are going to be the main thing that you're dealing with. So you got 2 sets of cards here. You have these yellow ones, and these are going to be shuffled up to start the game, and then each player is going to be dealt 6 because that's where they are on the resource track there. You've also got these cards with sort of a blue highlight there at the top. These are going to stay out of the deck until the U.S. player comes in the game. So to start the game, the U.S. stance is going to start here at 1, and then through different cards and different actions and things, this is going to go up. As soon as it hits 10, then play is going to freeze quickly, and then we're going to shuffle in these cards here, and then activate some of the different U.S. units. Now there's naval units here, and then there's a nice stack of deployment here. These guys are going to come in, and these guys are basically controlled by the Cuban player, going to help the Cuban player achieve victory. I'll talk a little bit more about that it makes it a little bit easier for the Cuban player to get some of the things done, but it also makes the victory condition a little bit harder to achieve in some senses. But it's going to give you a nice stack of beefy units to help you win. So you can see this is a 2 and 1, whereas I failed to show you the Cuban units. This is actually a 1, and then it actually has a strength of 0. So it gives the Cuban player a little bit of a beefy weapon to wield, but the Cubans, on the other hand, don't really want the U.S. taking credit for their victory as much as it did historically. Let's take a look at some of these cards here. Now there's a couple of things to notice. If you see any cards here that have the line with a little arrow under it, like these 2 cards, when you play these, you actually play these and they're out of the game permanently. Normally when you play a card without the line, so let's take a look at this card here, you'll play this one, it'll go into the discard pile. At the end of each round, you're going to take all the discard piles, shuffle it back into the deck, and then re-deal out of there. So any of these cards will only be used once. Now you can see some of these actually cost 1 resource to play. Normally on your turn you basically do 1 action, or you spend 1 resource, possibly more resources, and then your turn's over. So these other cards here that don't cost anything, you can play multiples of those. But as soon as you play a card that costs a resource, that kind of counts as an action. So you would be able to do that plus any other free cards, and then it'll pass to the next player. The Cuban player always goes first every turn, and then it's basically action, action, action until both players pass, and then that will end the turn. So you can see here, these will go out of the game. These will cost you a resource here. This is one that you can play for free. It'll still go out of the game. Any of these here that have a red border, you can see this one here has a red border, whereas these other cards do not have any border. These are actually played in reaction usually to combat. So when combat happens, the attacking player, the active player, can submit 1 card, and then the defending player can submit a card, and these will usually modify the die rolls and things like that. Now, these cards are going to do a whole lot of different things. They might manipulate the public support of the Spaniards directly. They might manipulate the U.S. stance on the war directly. You may put out some special tokens on the board here to remind you of different things. For example, you can set up these tracha markers here. These are sort of like little garrisons here, because as you can see now, everybody's kind of starting down here in the south. And so again, one of the goals of the Cubans is not only to drive support down, but also to try and capture these cities. You're pretty much locked into battles here, so you want to try to, both players want to try to kind of zerg up and get units up here to protect Havana, especially if this U.S. stance comes in early. Now I've seen games happen where this U.S. stance, the war from the U.S. perspective takes a while, it gets into like the 5th turn, and then I've seen it at the end of the 2nd turn even come in. So if the Spaniards aren't ready, it's going to be pretty easy for there's going to be a large division of U.S. troops to be able to take Havana pretty quickly. So getting back to these garrison markers here, if the Spanish player plays one of these out with an event card and then later recruits a new unit into there, then this is going to basically make it a lot harder for the Cuban player to march troops forward, because they can't just recruit new troops out into anywhere. They got to have a general, so you're going to have to move your general up, get them through here. So if you can get an early one of these, it can lock it down. So I'll just make a quick little review comment. I have seen the game be, I don't want to really call it swingy, but the games play out very differently. So I've seen a lockdown quagmire here where the Cuban players very much pinned down. In that particular game, though, they were able to advance the U.S. stance pretty quickly, and then now, like I was talking about earlier, the U.S. was able to get in here and take that early. On the other hand, there was no Traca played in the other game I played, and so we were able to kind of spread out. We had a nice sort of, I don't know if you call it a land war, but there was a lot happening. Fields are getting burnt. There's all kinds of different things you can do here to help drive down support, and then try to pick the right opportunity to take out the city. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but that's a little bit of the flavor of what's going to happen here with some of the different event cards and things. There'll be other cards that'll manipulate resources, sort of directly attack troops. There's other little tokens that'll come out here that are going to change up sort of the pace of the U.S. stance in a war, and possibly mess with players' resources and things like that. So let's go over the couple of different actions that can happen on the game here. That are sort of your standard actions. So it comes with one player aid. I wish there was 2 actually, because it's a decent player aid. I'll talk more about this in the review. But you have your action matrix here, so you can play a card. You can play multiple cards, but one that costs a resource. You can do what's called a coordinated action here. So I could do like a move and an attack. But since each of these costs a resource, if I wanted to coordinate them, that would cost an additional resource. So that would actually be 3 resources, but it kind of be, one big move. And that would be kind of my one thing. So if you want to combine 2 actions, you got to play an extra resource on top of what you combine there. You can burn fields, you can recruit, you can lobby the stance, so whoever lobbies, so if the Spanish player lobbies the US up here, then the stance will reduce. If the Cuban player lobbies, then they'll increase it towards war. And you can see here they have these stars here. That means a general is required for the action, so you need a general token present, with whatever unit or in whatever space to do that action. So you can move, attack. The Spanish player can ask for reinforcements. You can see which of these units can do it. So that gives you a nice little matrix there. There's a couple other things we'll talk about in a second, but there's also a Captain General action. Now, if you look up here in Havana, Campos here, he starts the game up in Havana here, and he's a general for all intents and purposes. Now, while you have a captaincy general up there, you can count this guy as fulfilling the general requirement for the Spanish player. Now it's going to cost you extra resources to use him, but if you wanted to say, do an attack and you don't have a general, which you don't start with down here. If we look down here in Oriente, there's a nice stack of guys here, but there's no general with them. So to use that, you can actually kind of have this guy sort of commanding from the home base, but it's going to cost you more resources to do that, and that goes for any actions that require a general. So moving is very simple. You just need a general. You can move it to adjacent spots. You can do, if you're the Cuban player, basically recruit, but you have to do actually a recruitment roll. Now anytime you roll for anything in this game, you need to roll a 5 or a 6 for a success before modifiers. You can obviously have modifiers to make lower rolls better, but to recruit actually even one unit, you need to roll and get a success. Now in the first 2 turns it's marked on the chart up there, but you get a +1 modifier to your recruitment rolls. But if you try to do recruitment and fail, then too bad. So that's kind of an interesting thing I'll talk about in my review a little bit more, but the Cuban player actually has to kind of randomly recruit. Now you can get other cards and things to help you with that. Now as far as the Spanish player, they have a different action. That's asking for reinforcements. When you do that, you're going to take 2 from your holding box. This is your sort of supply of troops here. Whenever you do that though, your support's actually going to go down by 1 every time you try to recruit new units. So the Cuban player is a little bit random, but the Spanish player basically is hurting themselves in terms of the victory condition. You recruit new units, and the Cuban player requires a general, the Spanish doesn't. That's all outlined on here. When you recruit new units, you don't automatically stack them. There's different rules about where you can put them. Obviously the Cuban player needs the general there, but the Spanish player can basically put them anywhere they want. Now the Cuban player may want to do a burn fields action. That's another thing they can do. You take the burn field action here, put that on there. That basically is killing off the resources for everybody on that turn. If they're both units are in a spot, then they're going to kind of share collecting resources at the end of the round. That basically kills it off for everybody. And if there are no burnt fields, then the public support is going to go up. So you kind of want to burn a little bit of fields there, just to irritate the populace. However, when you do something like that, or do anything else like move, if you're the Cuban player, you have to put one of these little markers on there. So this basically flushes them out and gets them available, so it's a little bit easier to attack them. So let's talk about what these markers are in the attacking and defending. Well, when the Cuban player wants to attack the Spanish player, it's very simple. You just go and attack, you compare attack values. You can see here we've got a 1 against basically a 6 here. That wouldn't be very smart, but you could do that if you wanted to. Some of the generals here have different icons on them. Like this guy will give you a +1 DRM when you're attacking or defending. Other generals and things will give you, resources and things. So this guy will actually give you a resource at the end of the round. You basically roll the number of times that you are higher. So a better example would be, this guy would be 6 here to his 1, and then you'd roll basically the die 5 times, and then any 5s or 6s modified by different modifiers is going to count as a success. For each success, you've got to basically flip units down to their reduced side, and then eventually remove them for each success that you roll. But the Spanish player, before they attack, they have to sort of flush out, so they have to search. So what they're going to do here is, let's say we'll take this example here. This stack here is 1 unit against 1 unit here. In this case, you don't count the number on there. You count the number of units, and you actually ignore the leader. So this is 1 to 1. So you always get at least 1 die roll, even if the odds are even or whatever. So you're going to roll that, and you have to get a success to flesh them out and then attack them. So when you're attacking from Spain, you're always doing a search action and then an attack action. Now, because these guys went and burned a field earlier, they're now a little bit easier to find. So this will add a +1 DRM to that. So a 4, 5, or 6 will actually reveal them. And again, you can play cards and get other things like that. Now the Spanish folks can also take a search and destroy action here. So that might be something that this stack does over here. It's a very interesting little thing here. So what you do with the search and destroy is you actually pull one guy off the stack, put him there with this on there, and that's going to add a +1 DRM for the search as well. So if they were in here, let's say, trying to find them, you'd have basically 3, 4, 5, or 6 to be able to find them. But because you do that, because you separate them, your battle odds aren't going to be as great. It's kind of like one, sort of small unit of troops going into the jungle or whatever and trying to find the people. They're a little bit more effective at finding them, but when the battle comes, they're kind of fighting on Cuban turf, so to speak. Whereas it's a little harder for a big group to find a small group hidden in the jungle. That's a pretty interesting thing. Now the Cuban player can also set aside a unit like so to actually protect the fields there. And what that basically means is they're protecting the fields. The field cannot be burned while somebody's there, but these guys also get hurt a little bit easier when they're attacked. Now the nice thing about this is it's all referenced here, but for the procedure, if you want to remind yourself what the recruit procedure is, you just go to section 8.8 in the rule book, and they're nicely bulleted and everything like that. So you can say let's look at 8.16 there. So that tells you about the captaincy general action. You can look at the how to form a search and destroy column and what that does there. So it's a very simple little paragraph that you read just based on that. As you're kind of learning the game, it's very helpful. The only thing I haven't talked about is lobbying. Basically, whatever side rolls a die on a success, then the U.S. stance will go up or down as you wish. Pretty much the gist of the game. Basically, play an action, play some cards here. You can play against some of these cards in reaction to combat, or maybe in reaction to a search by the Spaniards. The game is definitely going to change once the U.S. enters the play, and then it's going to kind of change up the dynamics of the game quite a bit. So that's a very interesting sort of singular moment in the game, where it's just these little sort of small skirmishes possibly, and depending how well the Cubans can recruit people. And then once the U.S. enters, then it's a little bit more for the Spanish to deal with, but the Cubans don't really want the U.S. to be that good, so that's kind of an interesting dynamic for the Cuban player to consider. See what I think. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the overview. Now this is a very interesting game. Now it's kind of borderline, almost like a gateway game into CDGs, maybe. It kind of feels like that because it is pretty straightforward. You just get a few actions you can do. There's not any kind of like Twilight Struggle where you're trying to figure out, do I play this card for ops or the event? There's not really that built into it. You have a list of normal actions you can do. Sometimes the cards cost a resource, but that's just what it is. You play the card for the resource. Now one thing I didn't mention, just remembering it now, is you can discard 3 cards to count as 1 resource. So now because it's such a big deck, it's very possible that like the Spanish player could be dealt a bunch of cards that just help the Cuban player, because there's no like I said, there's no balance or offset of ops versus event like in Twilight Struggle or something. It's just like this card is good for the Cuban player, that's it, because it's very specific. So but you can still discard 3 of those to get a resource. Now the other thing that is interesting is the whole thing of like shuffling the discard back into the deck. So it's sort of an interesting thing because you play some of the cards and they go out of the game, but then you just kind of reshuffle everything, and then you get it's just like a completely new hand. Now you can keep for 1 resource a piece a card for the next round. So if you have a card that you think is going to be good next turn, you can spend a resource, and that's pretty interesting actually, because you're like, well, I'm not going to be able to do this attack now because I've got to move the U.S. guys in around a little bit or something. But it's going to be really helpful for me next turn. So I got to figure out how much I'm going to spend this turn to do my thing. But I still want to have the resource for the next round and stuff. So it's interesting. And like I said in the walkthrough, because of the kind of swinginess, it's going to feel, I think, very awkward. It did feel very awkward for me at first. Like the whole thing of the Cuban player having to roll to recruit a unit. I mean, it's like that. I mean, the first time I played it, I think it was 3 turns in a row. I was like, I'm going to try to recruit a unit. Oh, failed. I'm going to try to recruit a unit. Oh, failed. I'm like, this is horrible. What's going on? But then the next turn was much more favorable. I was able to get some more units out, and I was able to play, some better cards and really kind of, hammer the Spaniards a little bit. So I think this is something you kind of have to adjust to. And because of that, I think it kind of pushes a little bit against being introductory for people, because that's going to be very frustrating. And like I said, it is swingy, but it's cool how it plays differently every time, like I was saying, where you can kind of get locked into a southern battle, or the U.S. players like never going to come, and they finally come, or they can come very quickly, and then you've got a whole different kind of game happening. So that's really cool, but I think that is, for a new player, it's going to put them off. So that was kind of my expectation going in. I was like, okay, it's a little short 8-page rule book, you got a small set of actions, and you just kind of play cards and do what they say. And that's what the game really is, but there is a lot of sort of subtlety there and just swinginess that you have to kind of put up with. And so manipulating that political support is also very interesting, because when you have a Spanish general get killed, the support will go one way, and this Cuban general gets killed, it goes the other way. Or even if you damage a unit, it's going to swing back and forth. So there's a lot kind of happening there in terms of what the implications of your actions are. And then again, the other thing that's going to be off-putting, and this is kind of where the game sits in an interesting spot for me, is a whole reshuffling of the event cards. Yeah, you can keep them from round to round, but a lot of times, you maybe get dealt a hand that you don't even really want. I mean, that's happened more than a couple of times in the games that I've played. It doesn't mean the game goes on autopilot, because like I said, you can still play with resources, but it's like every hand for a little while, unless it's at the end of the game, then you're kind of being a little bit more careful. But those first few rounds can be very sort of like, wow, this is just kind of going all over the place. Now, what I like about that is in terms of more than the game part, because the game part, that kind of, it feels a little wonky there. But in terms of the simulation of it, I like that kind of approach of what they've taken here, because, like I said, you have that event, that monumental event of the U.S. entering and really changing up the balance of power. And I think what's interesting is it's more of a better way of kind of doing the historical look at it, because there's a ton of flavor text on the cards. I really like how the flavor is on each of the turns. I love to read that and then move into the turn with sort of an idea of, okay, this is what they did, but I'm looking at the cards I have, so I'm going to kind of do a different thing. So in terms of like the theme and the flavor and the sort of alternate history of it, I like how the game treats that, and I think that's where the game really excels the most, apart from the gameplay. Now, it sounds like I'm bashing on the gameplay when I'm saying that. I'm just saying, no, I think the point of the game is the thematic and the historical, because the gameplay is wonky, and I still can't get over that I have to roll to recruit a damn unit, but it's okay, because I get the theme of it, I get the historicity of that. But so that's very interesting part of the game there. Anyway, so I like this better than Victory Points did this. They had a game, and I'm just using this as an example. It was Operation Barbarossa 1941 or something like that. Barbarossa Campaign 1941. And that was very much a more historical thing, less of a game. But it was super scripted out. I mean, it was really, I couldn't even get through the thing. It was like, okay, so you're just giving me this, it was like a giant flowchart. I mean, like the coin games and stuff, they have these flowcharts that it tells you to do this and that. But that's not scripted. The way it plays out is you can kind of react against it. It's more like an AI. Where this other game was like this huge scripted thing you had to kind of like go through, and it was like kind of going through the motions. But it was interesting in the sense of, okay, this is cool, I'm kind of learning a little bit of the history and some of the considerations of what's happening, but it's like, but this feels like I'm just like on rails here. The game part of it was removed. Where this, on the other hand, maybe the game part suffers slightly. I hate to use the word suffer, because I don't think the game's bad at all. I think it's really fun in a lot of ways. But some of those little, idiosyncrasies of rolling to recruit, getting dealt a giant hand of cards that are pretty much just going to end up being resources for you, and things like that, and kind of the swinginess of that, driven out of that by the card deal and when the U.S. comes in and all that stuff like that. Because you can get no cards that move the U.S. up, or the Spanish guy can get all the cards. He's not going to play those. And the U.S. just kind of sits down there too. Anyway, I'm kind of harping on that. But to me, this is a better approach to examining the historicity of that, as opposed to the scripted side of like the Operation Barbarossa, whatever the game was called. Anyway, so I like that because it gives you more to explore. The game's going to play out differently every time, which I think is very important. So, and frankly, I kind of wanted to check this out because of Cuba Libre, which is sort of the second, fourth, or fifth Cuban War of Independence that happened almost 100 years later. Well, not quite 100 years, but 50 years later. So yeah, so it's got interesting. It's got that little counterinsurgency thing where you have to kind of flesh out the units and all that stuff. So all the little mechanics work well in a thematic way. It's just some of them can be kind of frustrating from a gameplay way. I think if you come at this from a non-sort of simulative historical approach, when you come at it from that approach, it's really cool. Like I said, you get the flavor text on the cards, you get to read all the turn stuff, you know, what the history was on the turn, and it plays very quickly, 7 turns, so it's got that nice historical flavor without, you know, having to take too long. And you can kind of see these different alternate histories and different things like that. So anyway, interesting little game, Cuba, the Splendid Little War. Thanks.